I presume that this is an accurate image of the fandom when Muhammad Ali Jr. was beaten by Baki Hanma at the end of Baki the Grappler Netflix anime season 3. I'm going to go into that and why it had to happen the way it happened. And, just sort of cover everything about the character that you can really sort of deep dive into. The difference between Muhammad Ali and sweet Baki Hanma is not one that you can really pin down with a simple phrase. But if I were to try, I would say it would be the difference between the gladiator and the athlete. What do I mean by this? You see, Baki is the gladiator. He enters into life and death battles in an underground arena run by some rich old dude who really disturbingly enjoys it when uh, men beat each other half to death inside his arena. And while that's actually quite based, Baki character, I'm sure he looks like a Baki character. And while that is quite based, it's not the same world that Muhammad Ali Jr. inhabits. You see, while Muhammad Ali Jr. is perfectly happy to fight for things, he doesn't feel comfortable fighting outside a controlled sports arena. You see, Baki will fight anytime, anywhere, with anything. It's honestly quite ferocious. It's quite deadly. It's quite exciting. Baki himself is an amazing character. The fights he gets into are wonderful. It's almost like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It's who will he fight next and for why? What will happen? What will be the next crazy thing? He starts one of his series by fighting a mantis, a praying mantis. He starts another one by uh, uh, this dude just running up to him and punching him in the face, and it's very JoJo-esque. It's like it's got that good feel to it. It's all wacky. Some biker gang comes out of nowhere and just wipes the floor with him, and so on and so forth. It's a very fun time. But Muhammad Ali Jr. isn't the same sort of creature. Rather than him being some sort of gladiator, always ready to fight, always ready to do this or that, there's a certain formality, a certain sportsmanship to him that isn't there for Baki. But Muhammad Ali Jr., if they were to fight Baki, if Baki and him were to fight in like boxing rules, would be a horrifying combatant, a real monster. At no point could you say that Muhammad Ali Jr. doesn't have an even fighting chance in an even fighting arena. The problem is that that's not the world that Baki inhabits. Baki inhabits a world where everyone is fighting to the death over pride or anything that they really want to fight over. Like it's that kind of world. It's a world where these characters duel each other because they have to determine who is the strongest. Because Baki seeks to defeat his father, Yujiro Hanma, who is the strongest man alive, strongest creature alive, strongest thing. He's basically a god at this point. Like, oh, look at him. He stands there, he yells, and people think it's a terrorist attack. Like it's all these sort of things is Yujiro Hanma. As he says during their proper fight, he goes, "Yes, the punch of Jiro Hanma is strong. The kick is beautiful, and so on and so forth. He is in awe of his um, father and the abilities he can just call on. He has to reach out up to his father who from birth was the ultimate being. He demanded his mother breastfeed him. He told the doctor to be careful with him, and so on and so forth. He had all these things, from birth. And then him working up to it is more him proving his superiority than him earning his superiority. Yujiro Hanma took everything he ever got, but it was the emphasis is on take. Baki has to earn it. He can take things from people like Yujiro Hanma does, but in reality, it's not the same sort of thing. Muhammad Ali Jr., in his relationship to his father, is one of the inheritor, not necessarily one who has to overcome. He defeated his father in a fight, and his father, though, isn't the same creature as Yujiro Hanma. He might have been the best boxer who ever lived, but he's still well past he's into his golden years. He's an old man. He's slow, and so on and so forth. He can't be Yujiro Hanma. Yujiro Hanma maintains his strength even years after he is past his middle age. Muhammad Ali Sr., not the same sort of man. The, uh, how do I want to put it? Muhammad Ali Jr. had a smaller gap to overcome between him and his father rather than between Baki and his father. That's the best way to put it. So, Muhammad Ali Jr. defeats his father and perfects his father's martial arts. But unlike Baki, from his childhood, his father hasn't given him the same rough upbringing that Yujiro has. All his father has done is teach him his thing. He hasn't emotionally abused him. He hasn't tried to destroy him and kill him. He hasn't killed his mother and so on and so forth. At least we assume so. There's no mention of Muhammad Ali Jr.'s mother. Um, and it just there's a certain softness to Muhammad Ali Jr. that he never really gets over, not even after he's finally defeated by Baki. So we've established that Muhammad Ali Jr. has had a softer upbringing. Muhammad Ali Jr. cares for sporting events. He is a fair individual. Even when he's fighting Dapo Orochi or Shibukawa, he is seeking to have an even and fair fight to a point. He goes to Shibukawa and he's like, dude, I don't think we're in the same weight class. What he says doesn't actually matter. Shibukawa's like, that's my whole shtick, dude. Let's do this. And then he loses the first fight, but he wins the second fight. Dapo Orochi fights him. And wow, that was a good punch, sort of thing. He, has all this reputation, this Dapo Orochi. He has kind of survived a fight with Yujiro Hanma, or rather revived against after a fight with Yujiro Hanma. And it all just kind of has this sort of feel of playfulness about him in the first fight. In the second fight, he's like, you know what? We weren't really fighting like our lives were on the line. And so what he does is, even though he allows Muhammad Ali Jr. To produce boxes, to put gloves on his hands and stuff like that to fight, it's still kind of like, okay, dude, I'll let you get every single advantage that you can get, and it still won't be enough. That's what Dopo Orochi is saying um, when he allows Muhammad Ali Jr. to wrap his hands during their second fight. Even though Muhammad Ali Jr. is injured, even though he's honestly really not into it right now, though he tries to work himself up to it, Muhammad Ali Jr., outside of a fair fight and outside of time to have a even keel with his opponent, does not have the same advantage in the street as he would in the ring. One of the reasons why the mangaka put this up was to show Baki's growth. So let's comment over the arcs, right? So in the first few arcs, he's fighting various martial artists. The first arcs, he defeats Hanayama, he defeats Shibukawa. I think he defeats Shibukawa. I can't really remember that one too well. I kind of just through a lot of it. He defeats Suedo. Um, various characters who show up. So at the end of the first anime, he defeats Jack Hanma, his brother. Jack Hanma the monster, the man who will bite people because he's that kind of savage. You know, he breaks himself constantly just to get a little bit more of an advantage. That's Jack Hanma. So Baki defeats him. So he has overcome all other claimants to fight his father from his family. So let's go to the Great Rantai tournament. He goes in there and he defeats Chinese martial artists. There is no depth to the strength of Baki Hanma. I skipped over the Most Dangerous Convicts art. In the Most Dangerous Convicts art, he doesn't even fight. What he's overcoming is a certain naivete. He's overcoming his youth, and when he has relations with his girlfriend, uh, he has become a new man afterwards because he has overcome that certain virginity. It's like Lancelot. He goes through these things and he experiences these things, and afterwards he is made stronger by it, even though there's a certain element of weakness that comes to him because he is emotionally attached to his true love. Yujiro, of course, is all supporting this because he understands it. All of a sudden, Baki has someone in his pocket who will forever encourage him, who forever push him to be better than he was the day before. It's simply what it must be. Yujiro Hanma had no need of it. Again, he demanded, um, ooh, he demanded, milk from his mother. Like this is the type of, villain he is. And he's not even really a villain at this point. He's basically a main character. Um, and so at this point, he's how do I want to put it? At this point, he's overcome all these different things, right? So when he gets to the Muhammad Ali Jr. arc, he's not overcoming himself or anything like that. He's overcoming something that he could be. And that's the reality of Muhammad Ali Jr. as the ultimate sportsman. So Muhammad Ali Jr., as I previously established, had a different sort of raising childhood for it. I'm sure that Muhammad Ali Jr. has earned his spots with all the fights he's ever done. It's not he has his father's reputation, but he proves that he is his father's son at every moment. Even in some of the fights where it's clearly unfair to him, he still puts up as good a fight as he can. And even against Jack Hanma, we see a side of him where he just takes the beating and he revels in it. He glories in the fact that he was beat because he understands something of his limits, and it's a horrifying moment. His tongue's hanging everywhere. He's got all these problems. It's clearly a savage moment because Jack Hanma is a savage man, but he accepts it. So he doesn't even change his stances. Oh, I lost. I guess I'll get back up and go somewhere else, and so on and so forth. So with that, we have the same amount of determination. We have the willingness to take a beating. Even though Muhammad Ali Jr. loses his street fights, it's really just a springboard for him to break through his limits and make Baki's eventual victory over him more glorious. It's not enough that Baki has to win against a man who has lost several times. He has to win against a man who has lost, overcome it, and is ready for a fight against the second strongest person on earth at this point. Even though Muhammad Ali Jr. expects a fair fight, no ball kicking, no biting, no anything like that, he's still more than willing to jump into the gladiator's arena using the gladiator's rules to prove his mettle against his opponents. Baki crushes him, because Baki is no longer, or even ever was, a sportsman. He was the man shooting to be the strongest person on earth. He is the man who's shooting to overcome his father. He might say, "Listen, I just want to beat my dad," but but his dad is the strongest. You see, Muhammad Ali Jr. has already overcome it. He is pitted against Baki, and the implication is that he would eventually have to fight Yujiro Hanma if he won against Baki. But you see, he never got that chance, and even then, Yujiro would destroy him because Yujiro understands that you have to fight like you're going to die in this world of theirs. So Muhammad Ali Jr. he there's a lot of controversy about his loss to Baki and his build up and his emotionality and stuff like that because people don't really understand his character. At the end of it, he's not as mature as Baki. He's not as vicious as Baki. He's not as anything like this as Baki. The only thing he probably has on Baki is that if the two were to fight in an even ring, he'd be even more powerful, using boxing rules. But the fact of the matter is that that's not what was offered to him. And instead, he was stuck with a fight that favored somebody who's willing to kick somebody in the testicles more than somebody who wasn't going to. And everyone agrees that yeah, Muhammad Ali Jr. probably could have beaten Baki, but Baki didn't let him have that chance. There's all kinds of differences between characters like Muhammad Ali Jr. and characters who don't get much of a name, but are set up for the fall. They're jobbers, that sort of thing. I won't go into it too deeply because this is outside the scope of the video. But basically, even though Muhammad Ali Jr. never really had a chance of beating Baki, he had all the chance in the world to fight Baki and have a chance at victory, even if he didn't have an actual winning chance. He had the chance to punch Baki in the face, and he had the chance to just charge in and take care of business. But Baki also had that chance of kicking him in the balls and punching him out. This translates over to the next arcs of Baki, which is the pickle and fight with Yujiro Hanma, as well as a few other characters lying around, who are not so important. The reason why this happens is to show that Baki is above all normal or excellent characters in the series so far, even ones designed from birth to overcome him. Even though Muhammad Ali Jr. was set up to be greater than Baki, with all the advantages, kindness, generosity that um, Baki never had, he could not overcome Baki. And that's no reason to say Muhammad Ali Jr. was a terrible character. He was a great character. He was a fantastic character. But the purpose of his character was completely different than a main character like Baki. Muhammad Ali Jr. Only deserved to have a fight against Baki. He did not deserve to win. Muhammad Ali Jr. had already been given every advantage he would need for the fight, but he didn't use it to his advantage because he refused, even at the end, to accept the gladiator do or die mindset. And even though his father is kind of to blame for allowing it to continue on like that, for not putting in that sort of deathly focus into his son, even saving him at the last moment after Baki proves that he can kill a man if he needs to. Muhammad Ali Jr. is not a poorly written character about that. Even though he laughs and he's emotions on his sleeve, it's not to his detriment, but to his benefit in his characterization. Baki is a fairly cold customer. He's warm to people like his girlfriend and some of his family and friends and stuff like that. But in actuality, he's cold. He doesn't interact with people who he doesn't know, and he only really cares about people he can fight or have helped him in the past. Friends. Muhammad Ali Jr. interacts with people he doesn't know all the time. He stands in the background because he understands that like things like the Great Rai Tai tournament aren't really anything more than something he's in for a fight. He steps back when he doesn't need to be there, and then he comes back in whenever he wants for his story arc and story purposes. Overall, it's well designed, well crafted, and it sets up Baki for even greater heights. At the end of the arc, you shouldn't be thinking, "Wow, they did my boy Muhammad Ali Jr. wrong." You should be thinking that Baki is ready to fight his father. He's got what it takes. And of course, that's the whole next 300 chapters, what the next 300 chapters leads up to, because it's never that easy. Overall, if I were to say what Muhammad Ali Jr. was doing in the Baki universe, now I haven't read every chapter, so there could be chapters about him I don't even know about. But I would say that he's essentially recovering his emotional state. He's taking care of business, and he's entering the sports field. And eventually, if I was the author, I'd bring Muhammad Ali Jr. back for another fight sometime, because that's like it would be kind of a waste to have a character that well developed who he doesn't bring back. He brings back Jack Hanma. He brings back Biscuit Oliver. Yeah, so it's I think it's yeah, he has to beat Pickle, Biscuit Oliver, and a few other characters. But he brings these characters back, Hanayama and so on. Why not bring Muhammad Ali Jr. back? That would be a fantastic rematch. I certainly wish it would come about. Ah, well. Overall, uh, the complaints about Muhammad Ali Jr.'s character and how they designed him forgets the purpose of the story, which is centered around Baki Hanma, not some other dude who was introduced, a few chapters back, half an arc or uh, a season or two back. It's not the same purpose. I do think I wish to see him again. I wish to see him grown up more. But as it stands, we're going to have to be satisfied with what we've seen so far. I'm looking forward to the next season of the anime, and I hope you are too. Thank you. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon.